a story of courage, belonging, and the bonds that defined family under the broken wagon, the Arizona. Sun beat down mercilessly on Samuel McKenna's weathered face as he guided his horse along the dusty trading route. At 52, Sam had grown accustomed to the solitude of his small ranch on the outskirts of Prescott. The town's weekly supply run was one of the few reasons he ventured beyond his property lines, where the silence was broken only by the wind, through the mesquite trees, and the occasional call of his cattle. The overturned wagon appeared like a dark scar against the pale desert landscape. Sam's practiced eye immediately recognized the signs of Apache raid, probably 2 days old. The scattered belongings told a story he'd seen too, many times in other families' dreams, reduced to broken wood and torn fabric fluttering in the desert wind. He dismounted slowly, his boots crunching on the sun-baked earth. The bodies of the wagon's occupants lay nearby, already claimed by the desert's harsh reality. Sam removed his hat out of respect, running calloused fingers through his graying hair. He'd bury them. Proper, it was the right thing to do. As he began gathering stones for makeshift graves, a small sound caught his attention. A whimper, barely audible above the desert breeze. Sam froze, listening intently. There it was again, coming from beneath the wagon's overturned bed. Dropping to his knees, Sam peered into the shadowy space. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. A small girl, no more than 8 or 9, pressed herself against the wagon's broken axle. Her dark eyes were wide with terror, her small body trembling. But it wasn't just fear he saw in those eyes, it was the unmistakable features of Apache heritage. "Easy there, little one," Sam whispered, his voice gentle despite the shock coursing through him. "I'm not going to hurt you." The girl shrank back further, her breathing rapid and shallow. Dried tears had left streaks through the dust on her cheeks, and her simple dress was torn and dirty. She clutched a small wooden doll to her chest, knuckles white with the intensity of her grip. Sam's mind raced. An Apache child with a white family's wagon. The implications were staggering. In 1887, Arizona territory, such a situation could mean death for both of them if discovered by the wrong people. The Apache Wars might have officially ended, but hatred and suspicion ran deep on both sides. "I know you're scared," Sam continued, slowly extending his hand. "But you can't stay under there. The desert night gets cold, and there are things out here that... Well, you need shelter." The girl's eyes darted between Sam's face and his outstretched hand. Something in his weathered features, perhaps the genuine concern in his blue eyes, or the patient way he waited, seemed to reach her. Slowly, cautiously, she began to crawl out from under the wagon. Standing in the full sunlight, she was even smaller than Sam had thought. Her hair was long and black, braided with small beads that caught the light. Despite her obvious Apache features, she wore the simple calico dress of a frontier child. The contradiction of her appearance told a story. Sam was beginning to piece together. "What's your name, child?" he asked softly. She looked up at him, her dark eyes searching his face. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Ayana." The name was pure Apache, eternal blossom. Sam nodded slowly. "That's a beautiful name. I'm Sam. Samuel McKenna." Ayana's gaze shifted to the bodies near the wagon, and fresh tears began to well in her eyes. "Mama, Papa," she whispered. Sam single quotes. The white couple lying in the desert had been her adoptive parents, or perhaps they'd taken her in after a raid years ago. Either way, she'd lost the only family she'd known. "I'm sorry, Ayana," Sam said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so very sorry." The girl looked up at him again, and in that moment, Sam saw something that would haunt him forever. Child's complete and utter aloneness in a world that had no place for her. Too Apache for white society, too white-raised for Apache acceptance. She was caught between two worlds, belonging to neither. Without conscious thought, Sam knelt down to her level. "Listen to me, Ayana. I know you're scared, and I know you don't know me. But I want you to know something, and I want you to remember it always." She watched him intently, clutching her doll tighter. "You will never have to hide again," Sam said, his voice firm with conviction. "Not from who you are, not from the world. I don't know how yet, but I promise you will never have to make yourself small or invisible to survive. Do you understand?" Ayana stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Sam lifted the small girl onto his horse. Behind them, 3 fresh graves marked the tragedy that had brought them together. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the challenge of keeping an impossible promise. But as they rode toward Sam's ranch, Ayana's small hand gripping his shirt, Sam McKenna knew his solitary life was over. For better or worse, he was no longer alone. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and the distant sound of a hawk's cry, as if the land itself was witnessing the beginning of an unlikely family. The weight of quite 3 weeks had passed since Sam brought Ayana home to his small ranch. The adobe house, which had echoed with loneliness for so many years, now carried the soft sounds of a child's presence, the whisper of bare feet on wooden floors, the quiet humming of half-remembered songs, and the gentle clatter of dishes as Ayana helped with morning chores. Sam watched her from the kitchen doorway as she fed the chickens, scattering grain with the careful concentration of a child, determined to do everything perfectly. She wore one of his old shirts, sleeves rolled up and hemmed to fit her small frame, and a pair of boy's trousers he'd bought on his last trip to town, telling the storekeeper they were for a neighbor's son. The lies were beginning to weigh on him. "Morning, little one," Sam called out. Stepping into the dawn light, Ayana turned, offering him a small smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Good morning, Sam." The brown hen laid 2 eggs today. Her English was flawless, with only the slightest accent that spoke of her early years. Sam had learned that her adoptive parents, the Henrys, had taken her in as a baby after a brutal raid on an Apache settlement. They'd raised her as their own, traveling from town to town, never staying long enough for questions to be asked about their daughter's obvious heritage. "That's fine work," Sam said, accepting the warm eggs. "How about we make some of those pancakes you like?" As they prepared breakfast together, Sam's mind wandered to the growing challenges they faced. Ayana couldn't remain hidden on the ranch forever. She was a bright, curious child who asked questions about everything. Why didn't she go to school like other children? Why couldn't she play in town? Why did Sam always look worried when riders approached? The sound of hoofbeats interrupted his thoughts. Sam moved quickly to the window, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle mounted above the door. 3 riders approached. He recognized them as neighbors from the valley. "Ayana," he said quietly, "go to the root cellar. Remember what we practiced." The light faded from her eyes immediately. Without argument, she moved toward the hidden door near the kitchen pantry, her wooden doll clutched in her arms. Just before she disappeared, she looked back at Sam with an expression that made his chest tighten, the look of a child who understood. She was something to be hidden. Sam opened the front door as the riders approached. Tom Bradley, his closest neighbor, dismounted with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. Behind him rode the Murphy brothers, rough men who ran cattle on the eastern edge of the valley. "Morning, Sam," Bradley called out, his weathered face creased with concern. "Hope you don't mind us stopping by." "Not at all. Coffee's fresh if you're interested." "Appreciate it, but this isn't a social visit." Bradley's expression grew serious. "We've had reports of Apache activity in the area. Small groups mostly, but they hit the Morrison place 2 nights ago. Took some horses, scattered their cattle." Sam's blood ran cold, but he kept his expression neutral. "Anyone hurt?" "No, thankfully. But it's got folks spooked. There's talk of forming a patrol, riding the boundaries regular like. Sheriff's asked all the ranchers to keep their eyes open." One of the Murphy brothers, a thick-set man with cold eyes, spat into the dust. "Should have finished them all off years ago. Can't trust any of them." "Now, Jake," Bradley said mildly, though his tone carried warning. "Let's not paint everyone with the same brush." "Easy for you to say," Jake Murphy shot back. "Your family wasn't killed by them savages." Sam felt anger rising in his chest, but forced himself to remain calm. "These raids, they take anything besides horses. Some food, supplies, nothing too valuable." Bradley studied Sam's face. "You've seen anything unusual? Tracks, signs of movement?" "Nothing," Sam replied truthfully, "but I'll keep watch." After the men left, Sam waited a full 10 minutes before calling Ayana from the cellar. She emerged slowly, dust in her hair and that terrible resigned look in her eyes. "They're gone," Sam said gently. Ayana nodded, but didn't speak. She walked to the window and stared out at the distant mountains, her small shoulders rigid with tension. "Hey," Sam said, kneeling beside her. "What's wrong?" "I heard what that man said," she whispered, "about finishing us all off." The pain in her voice cut through Sam like a blade. He'd tried to protect her from the harsh realities of the world beyond their ranch. But she was smart too, smart not to understand the danger she represented simply by existing. "Ayana, look at me." She turned, and Sam saw tears threatening to spill from her dark eyes. "Do you remember what I promised you? That I wouldn't have to hide anymore." "That's right, and I meant it. But sometimes, Sam struggled to find the right words. "Sometimes keeping a promise takes time. It means being patient, while we figure out how to make it true. Will I ever go to school? Will I ever have friends?" The questions hung in the air between them, heavy with longing and uncertainty. Sam wanted to give her easy answers, false comfort, but he'd learned that Ayana was too perceptive for lies. "I don't know," he said finally. "But I'm working on it. Every day, I'm thinking about how to make this world a place where you can be yourself, where you can be proud of who you are." That afternoon, as Ayana napped in the shade of the porch, Sam sat with a letter he'd been composing for days. It was addressed to his sister Martha in California, a woman he hadn't spoken to in over 10 years. Not since their bitter argument over his decision to remain in Arizona after their parents' death. Martha had married a teacher, lived in a small city where differences might be more easily accepted, where a mixed child might find a place to belong. But sending Ayana away felt like breaking his promise, in a different way protecting her. By abandoning her, as the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Sam made a decision. He wouldn't send Ayana away, and he wouldn't keep her hidden forever. Somehow, he would find a way to make his promise true. But first, he had to survive the growing tensions in the valley, where fear and prejudice were as dangerous as any Apache raid. The test of faith. Months had passed since the neighbor's visit, and the situation in the valley had grown increasingly tense. More ranchers reported missing livestock, and rumors of Apache raids spread faster than wildfire. Sam noticed the change in town: suspicious glances, hushed conversations that stopped when he approached, and a general atmosphere of fear that made every interaction feel dangerous. Ayana had grown quieter too, spending more time in the root cellar as riders became more frequent visitors to the ranch. Sam could see the toll it was taking on her, the way she flinched at unexpected sounds, how she'd grown thin from stress, and most heartbreaking of all, how she'd stopped asking about the outside world. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning. In late October, Sam was repairing a section of fence when he heard the thunder of many horses approaching. His heart sank as he counted them: at least 8 riders, including Sheriff Morrison and several men he didn't recognize. This wasn't a neighborly visit. "Ayana," he called out, trying to keep his voice calm. "Sella now." She appeared in the doorway, took one look at the approaching dust cloud, and disappeared without a word. Sam had barely closed the hidden door. When the riders reached his yard, Sheriff Morrison dismounted first, his badge catching the morning sun. Behind him came Tom Bradley, the Murphy brothers, and 4 men Sam didn't recognize, hard-faced individuals with the look of professional Indian hunters. "Morning," McKenna Morrison said, his tone official and cold. "We need to search your property." "On whose authority?" Sam asked, though he already knew the answer would be bad. "Territorial authority. We have reports of Apache sympathizers in the area, possibly harboring fugitives." Morrison's eyes never left Sam's face. "You have any objection to us looking around?" Sam's mind raced. Refusing would only confirm their suspicions, but allowing the search meant certain discovery. "What kind of reports?" One of the strangers stepped forward. A tall man with a scar running from his left temple to his jaw. The kind that suggests someone's been feeding information to the raiders. Someone who knows which ranches to hit when folks are away from home. "That's a serious accusation," Sam said carefully. "Serious times call for serious measures," the scarred man replied. "I'm Captain Hayes, contracted by the territory to investigate irregular Apache activity. We found evidence of regular supply drops: food, ammunition, supplies being left at predetermined locations." Sam's blood chilled. He'd been leaving supplies for any Apache who might need them. A small gesture of humanitarian aid that now looked like treason. "I run cattle, Sheriff. I don't know anything about Apache raids or supply drops." "Then you won't mind if we take a look around," Morrison said. It wasn't a question. The search began systematically. Sam watched helplessly as the men went through his barn, his storage shed, and finally approached the house. His heart hammered as they entered the kitchen, their boots loud on the wooden floor. "Nice place," Hayes commented, his eyes taking in every detail. "Quiet out here. Private. Good place for secret meetings." "It's a good place for a man to mind his own business," Sam replied. Hayes smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Sometimes, a man's business becomes everyone's business. The search continued for what felt like hours. Sam watched them examine every room, every closet, every possible hiding place. They were thorough, professional, and getting closer to the kitchen pantry with each passing minute. Then Jake Murphy called out from the bedroom. "Hey, Captain, you need to see this." Sam's heart stopped. Had they found something? Some trace of Ayana's presence? Hayes disappeared into the bedroom, followed by Morrison and the others. Sam heard low voices. Then Hayes emerged holding something in his hand, a small beaded bracelet. "Interesting decoration for a bachelor rancher," Hayes said, holding up the bracelet. "Apache work, unless I'm mistaken." Sam's mind raced. The bracelet was Ayana's, something she'd made during their long evenings together. Following half-remembered teachings from her earliest years, she must have left it in his room after one of their talks. "Found it on a trading post," Sam said, his voice steady, despite the panic clawing at his chest. "Thought it was pretty." "Pretty," Hayes repeated, turning the bracelet over in his hands. "You know what I think, McKenna? I think you're lying. I think you've been playing both sides of this war, and I think you're hiding something." The silence stretched between them, heavy with accusation and danger. Sam could feel the weight of 8 pairs of eyes on him, could sense the violence lurking just beneath the surface of their suspicion. Then, from the kitchen, came a sound that made Sam's blood turn to Esau's small sneeze, muffled but unmistakable. Hayes' head snapped toward the sound, his eyes lighting up with predatory satisfaction. "What was that?" "Nothing," Sam said quickly. "Old house settles sometimes." But Hayes was already moving toward the kitchen, the other men following. Sam watched helplessly as they approached the pantry, knowing that discovery was only moments away. "Please," Sam said, surprising himself with the desperation in his voice. "Whatever you think I've done, I can explain." Hayes paused, his hand on the pantry door. "I'm sure you can, McKenna. But explanations won't help you now." He pulled open the door, revealing the shelves of preserved food and supplies. But Sam had built the cellar entrance. Well, it was invisible, unless you knew exactly where to look. Hayes examined the pantry thoroughly, running his hands along the walls, tapping for hollow sounds. He was close, so close that Sam could barely breathe. Then Tom Bradley called out from the front yard. "Captain, you need to see this." Hayes cursed under his breath and abandoned his search. The men filed out of the house, leaving Sam alone with his terror and the knowledge that Ayana was still hidden, still safe. But for how long? Outside, Bradley was pointing toward the eastern pasture where a small herd of cattle grazed peacefully. "Those cattle, they're not branded with Mark." Sam stepped onto the porch, his legs unsteady. "Those are strays I rounded up. Haven't had time to brand them yet." "Convenient," Hayes said. "Or maybe they're payment for services rendered." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Sam realized that no matter what evidence they found or didn't find, Hayes had already made up his mind. The captain wanted a scapegoat for the valley's troubles, and Sam had become the perfect target. "I think we've seen enough," Morrison said finally, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced of Sam's innocence. The men mounted their horses. Hayes rode close to the porch. "This isn't over, McKenna. I'll be watching you. And when I find proof of what you're doing, territorial law will deal with you accordingly." Sam watched them ride away, dust obscuring their figures until they disappeared beyond the ridge. Only then did he allow himself to breathe, to feel the full weight of how close they'd come to disaster. He waited another hour before opening the cellar door. Ayana emerged slowly, her face pale and her eyes wide with terror. "I heard them," she whispered. "They almost found me." Sam knelt down and pulled her into his arms, feeling her small body tremble against his chest. "But they didn't. You're safe. For now," she said, and the adult wisdom in her child's voice broke his heart. That night, as Ayana slept fitfully in his bed, Sam sat on the porch and stared at the stars. The search had been a warning, a preview of what would happen if they were discovered. Hayes wouldn't give up, and the next time, they might not be so lucky. For the first time since finding Ayana under that broken wagon, Sam began to wonder if keeping his promise was worth the risk of getting them both killed. The promise fulfilled, winter had settled over the Arizona territory with unusual harshness, bringing cold winds and a blanket of snow that transformed the desert landscape into something almost unrecognizable. Sam stood at his kitchen window, watching Ayana play in the snow, the first she'd ever seen. Her laughter carried on the crisp air, a sound that had become increasingly rare over the past months. It had been 6 weeks since Captain Hayes' search, and the pressure had only intensified. 3 more ranches had been hit, and the territorial authorities were offering substantial rewards for information about Apache sympathizers. Sam knew it was only a matter of time before someone came forward with suspicions about the solitary rancher and his mysterious circumstances. The decision had been weighing on him for days. But watching Ayanna build a small snowman, with the innocent joy of a child who deserved so much more than a life of hiding, Sam finally knew what he had to do. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Sam cleared his throat. "Ayanna, I need to talk to you about something important." She looked up from her wooden doll, which she'd been mending with careful stitches. At 9 years old, she'd grown tall and lean, her features showing the promise of the beautiful woman she would become, but her eyes held shadows that no child should carry. "Are we leaving?" she asked quietly. Sam was continually amazed by her perceptiveness. "Yes, we are, but not the way you might think." He moved to his desk and retrieved a letter, one of several he'd received over the past month. "Do you remember me telling you about my sister Martha?" Ayanna nodded. "She lives in California. You had a fight." "That's right. Well, I wrote to her. Told her about you. About our situation." Sam's voice grew thick with emotion. "She wants to meet you. She and her husband run a small school in their town, and they think you could have a real life there." The silence stretched between them. Ayanna's hands stilled on her doll, and when she looked up, tears were streaming down her face. "You're sending me away." "I'm keeping my promise," Sam said, kneeling beside her chair. "Do you remember what I promised you under that wagon? That I'd never have to hide again." "That's right. And as long as you stay here, you'll always be hiding. But in California, with Martha and David, you could go to school. You could have friends. You could be proud of who you are. But what about you?" Ayanna's voice was barely a whisper. Sam's heart shattered. "I'll be fine. I've been alone before." "That's not what I mean." She set down her doll and looked directly into his eyes. "You promised I wouldn't have to hide. But you're hiding, too. You're hiding from the world because you're scared of what they'll think about caring for me." The truth of her words hit Sam like a physical blow. She was right. He'd been hiding just as much as she had, keeping their relationship secret, denying the love that had grown between them. "Martha says I could visit," Sam said weakly. "In a few years, when things settle down." "Things won't settle down," Ayanna said with the certainty of a child who'd learned hard truths too early. "There will always be people like that, Captain Hayes. There will always be people who think I don't belong anywhere." Sam stared at this remarkable child who'd somehow become the center of his world. "Then what do you think we should do?" Ayanna was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When she spoke, her voice was steady and sure. "I think we should stop hiding. Both of us." "Ayanna, you don't understand the danger. I understand that you found me under a broken wagon, promised I'd never have to hide again. I understand that you've been the only family I've ever really had. And I understand that if we keep running and hiding, we're breaking that promise every day." The next morning, Sam hitched up his wagon and loaded it with supplies. But instead of preparing for a journey to California, he was preparing for something far more dangerous, a trip to town. "Are you sure about this?" he asked Ayanna as she climbed onto the wagon seat beside him. She was wearing her best dress, her hair braided with the beads from her Apache heritage, and she held her wooden doll with quiet dignity. "I'm sure." The ride to Prescott took 2 hours, and with each mile, Sam felt his anxiety growing. By the time they reached the town's main street, his hands were sweating despite the cold. People stared as they passed. Sam had expected that a 9-year-old Apache girl riding openly beside a white rancher was bound to attract attention. But what he hadn't expected was the variety of reactions. Yes, there were hostile stares and whispered comments, but there were also curious looks, sympathetic glances, and a few outright smiles. Their first stop was the general store. Sam had been trading there for years, and the owner, Mrs. Patterson, had always been fair with him. As they entered, conversations stopped, and all eyes turned to them. "Morning, Mrs. Patterson," Sam said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. The elderly woman looked at Sam, then at Ayanna, then back at Sam. "Morning, Samuel. And who might this young lady be?" "This is Ayanna," Sam said, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "My daughter." The word hung in the air like a challenge. Sam had never used it before, but as he spoke it aloud, he realized it was the truest thing he'd ever said. Mrs. Patterson studied them both for a moment, then smiled. "Well, Ayanna, it's a pleasure to meet you. That's a beautiful doll you have there." "Thank you," Ayanna replied politely. "My mama made it for me before she died. I'm sorry for your loss, dear." Mrs. Patterson's voice was genuinely kind. "Would you like to help me pick out some ribbon for your hair?" I have some lovely blue that would match your dress. As Mrs. Patterson and Ayanna moved toward the fabric counter, Sam became aware of the conversations resuming around them. Not all of them were hostile, some were simply curious about the story behind this unlikely pair. Their next stop was the schoolhouse. Sam's hands shook as he knocked on the door, but Ayanna's calm presence beside him gave him strength. The teacher, Miss Rebecca Carson, was a young woman from back east who'd come to Arizona to bring education to the frontier. She listened as Sam explained their situation, her eyes moving between him and Ayanna, with growing understanding. "Can you read, Ayanna?" Miss Carson asked gently. "Yes, ma'am. Sam taught me. I can write too, and do arithmetic. Would you like to attend school here?" Ayanna looked up at Sam, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes, ma'am, very much." "Then you'll start Monday," Miss Carson said firmly. "I'll expect you here at 8 o'clock sharp." As they left the schoolhouse, Sam noticed Captain Hayes watching them from across the street. The man's scarred face was twisted with anger, but he made no move to approach them. Perhaps even he recognized that there was no law against a man raising an orphaned child, regardless of her heritage. Their final stop was the most important and the most dangerous. The saloon where many of the valley's ranchers gathered was usually a place Sam avoided. But today, it was essential. They pushed through the batwing doors into the smoky interior. Conversations died as every head turned toward them. Sam spotted Tom Bradley at a corner table with several other ranchers, including the Murphy brothers. "Gentlemen," Sam said, his voice carrying across the silent room, "I'd like you to meet my daughter, Ayanna." The silence was deafening. Sam could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on them, could sense the tension crackling in the air, like electricity before a storm. Then Tom Bradley stood up. The older rancher walked slowly across the room, his boots loud on the wooden floor. He stopped in front of Ayanna and studied her face carefully. "You're the little girl from the wagon," he said quietly. "Yes, sir," Ayanna replied, her voice steady despite the fear Sam knew she must be feeling. Bradley looked at Sam. "And you've been hiding her?" "I've been protecting her." "From what?" Sam gestured around the room. From people who would judge her for something she can't control." Bradley was quiet for a long moment. Then he knelt down to Ayanna's level. "What happened to your family, child?" "Apache raiders killed my mama and papa," Ayanna said simply. "Sam found me and took care of me. And now he's bringing you out of hiding. Why?" Ayanna looked up at Sam, then back at Bradley. "Because he promised I'd never have to hide from who I am, and keeping promises is important." Bradley studied her face, then slowly extended his hand. "Well then, Ayanna, welcome to the valley." As Ayanna shook his hand, the tension in the room began to ease. Not everyone approved. Sam could see the Murphy brothers glowering from their table, but Bradley's acceptance carried weight in the community. Over the following weeks, life settled into a new rhythm. Ayanna attended school, where she quickly proved herself to be one of the brightest students Miss Carson had ever taught. She made friends, slowly but surely, her gentle nature and quick wit winning over even the most reluctant classmates. There were still challenges. Some families wouldn't allow their children to play with her, and certain shops made them feel unwelcome. But for every closed door, another opened. Mrs. Patterson gave Ayanna small jobs at the store, paying her in candy and hair ribbons. The doctor's wife invited her to help with the church's charity work. Slowly, carefully, Ayanna began to build a place for herself in the community. One evening in spring, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Ayanna looked up at Sam. "You kept your promise," she said simply. Sam smiled, feeling a peace he hadn't known in years. "We both did. We stopped hiding." "Are you happy?" she asked. Sam looked at this remarkable girl who'd changed his life in ways he never could have imagined. She was growing up strong and confident, proud of her heritage while building her own future. She would never have to hide who she was again. "Yes," he said, putting his arm around her shoulders. "I'm happier than I've ever been." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sam McKenna realized that sometimes the most important promises are the ones that force us to become better than we thought we could be. He'd found Ayanna under a broken wagon, but in keeping his promise to her, he'd found himself as well. The lonely rancher was alone no more, and the hidden child had found her place in the world. In the end, that was the greatest victory of all. The end. Subscribe for more incredible stories. Did Sam and Ayanna's journey touch your heart? This tale of courage, family bonds, and keeping promises against all odds shows us that sometimes the greatest act of love is helping someone step into the light. If this story moved you, Please like this video to help us reach more people who need to hear stories of hope. Subscribe and hit the notification bell for more emotionally powerful narratives from around the world. Comment below. What did you think of Sam's decision? Would you have had the courage to keep such a dangerous promise? Share this story with someone who believes in the power of family, courage, and standing up for what's right. Author's note: this story explores themes of acceptance, courage, and the bonds that create true family. Set against the backdrop of 1887 Arizona territory, it examines how love and determination can overcome prejudice and fear, showing that sometimes the greatest act of protection is helping someone step into the light rather than hiding them in the shadows.